And joining us now here in studio, Matt Hartley. He's editor of the FP Tech Desk at the National Post. And it's good of you to come into TVO again for us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, some people actually didn't have their Blackberries go kaflooey last week, but a lot of people did. You want to remind us what went down?
Sure. What happened was on the Monday, a core switch failed inside of RIM's headquarters in England, one of their network operating centers. And what happened was when that goes down, core switch failures happen from time to time within RIM's network, but what this happened was that there was actually the backup failed as well. And so you started to get a piling up of messages, and there's so many messages that go in and out of Europe that you started to get messages piling up in other areas of the world as well. And so as the messages pile up, it gets harder to get them out. And so even once RIM got the servers back online in England, they actually had to slow down traffic in various parts of Europe in order to make sure that the congestion eased, and then that caused a backlog of messages in other parts of the world. And so he's had this chain reaction. And so that resulted in people getting their messages later than they should have, and also not getting some of their messages at all.
For a day and a half in some cases, right?
In some cases it was up to 3 days. So the outage started on Monday, and some people were still not getting messages by Wednesday, and by Thursday RIM said everything was back online, but there was still a little bit of lag in certain areas.
It is amazing at those kinds of moments when you find out how bloody dependent we've all become on these things, eh?
Absolutely, and for all the talk that RIM is in trouble or that this is a company that's on the ropes, when the BlackBerry goes down, there's mass panic. People are tied to these things. There's a reason you call them a crackberry. What
did Barack Obama do, one wonders?
Yeah, exactly.
He still uses his, or tries to anyway. Okay, let me read something to you. This is from Ars Technica, Monday. Tech writer John Brodkin, I don't know if you know him, but here's what he had to say about all this. The outage, he writes, which RIM acknowledged was the worst in its history, seems symbolic of the company's slow downfall. RIM's biggest problem is it is being left in the dust by the consumerization of IT. Business and consumer technology needs have uneasily coexisted for years, but consumerization is winning. And last week's BlackBerry outage tips the scales even further. RIM has spent the past few years being pounded on the consumer front, and consumer smartphone preferences have brought millions of non-BlackBerry mobile devices into the enterprise. Times have changed dramatically. RIM is no longer needed in the same way it once was. At the same time, the iPhone, Android, and other mobile platforms are now good enough for most business scenarios. Then last week happened. RIM fumbled, and fumbled badly. The company wasn't even able to execute on its top value proposition. Does the outage, this was a very dependable tool, right?
Sure.
People always thought it was very dependable. Does the outage call that proposition into question?
I think for some businesses it has to. RIM is a company that prides itself on uptime, security, on being there for businesses. That's what RIM built its reputation on, by being the standard device that was always there for politicians, for Wall Street, for Bay Street. And so when something like this happens, it does shake the confidence in that. A lot of RIM's growth over the past few years has come from the consumerization of IT, from actually moving from the enterprise market into the consumer market, selling BlackBerries to soccer moms and teenagers and people like that who wanted the device to get their email on and also do other things with. And so what's happened is now you're competing against iPhone and now with Android, which are both pretty much solely focused on the consumer end of the spectrum. And so RIM's seen a lot more competition there while trying to defend that enterprise base. Now, RIM is still the default choice for most companies. And yes, we hear about Apple and Android being used by various companies, that various companies are testing these devices in there, but we're not really sure exactly how many of these devices are being deployed within Fortune 500 companies. We know that there's some that are being used, but I think even RIM understands that this is happening, and so earlier this year, RIM actually created a new system where you can use certain BlackBerry technology to deploy and actually secure Android and iPhone within your company. So I think there's an acknowledgement on RIM's part that not every device within an organization has to be a BlackBerry, and so they're actually making it easier for people to use their secure technology to secure these other devices.
Can BlackBerry be the company it wants and needs to be if it only caters to a business audience?
No, it can't be the company it wants to be if it just goes to a business audience. But I think at the same time, we're forgetting that there's a lot of successes that RIM has had in the consumer market. And I think one of those is Blackberry Messenger, which is an incredibly popular instant messaging tool that's used by university students, by teenagers. I was on the TTC here in Toronto last week, and a group of 6 teenagers got on, and they were all BBMing, and all at once.
On a subway?
On the bus.
I was going to say.
So yeah,
can't get a signal in the subway.
No, exactly, not yet anyway.
Yeah.
And they were just they're fixated on it, and it's the way that they communicate. And so that's been a real huge win for RIM. They've got over 40. I think they have over 45 million BBM users around the world. And so if they can continue to build on those, they will see some success. But again, when you have the outages, BBM is one of those services that goes down.
The outages, I guess, reminded everybody that this is a company that whose problems did not start last week, right? Their problems go back a bit. Do you want to just give us some background here on when people first started to see signs that things were somewhat troublesome?
Sure. It goes back a couple of years. RIM's stock price has been, you can chart a lot of it through that. When the sort of global economic downturn started, that was when RIM really started to see its shares get hit. But you go back to the beginning of the year, and you started to see a slowdown in some of RIM's in the sales of Blackberries. iPhone was becoming more popular. You've now got Android that takes up almost 50% of the global smartphone market. And what happened was RIM had a few product delays. They were working hard on the playbook, and so they didn't have a lot of new Blackberries coming out. The Blackberry Torch, before this recent sort of round of Blackberries, was the newest one, and it came out in August of 2010. So what happened was you had new iPhones and new Android devices in stores, and they were competing against older model Blackberries. So you saw a slowdown in those sales. And then at the same time, you had the Playbook, which came out earlier this year, which was really highly touted, and RIM had a lot of hopes riding on it.
Their answer to iPad?
Yeah, it was the answer to the iPad. And while it's a very solid device, it got fairly good reviews when it came out. It was a bit disappointing on the sales side. It did lack some core features that people thought maybe should have been there, native email, things like that. But at the same time, nobody was talking bad about the software that actually runs on it, which is this QNX platform that RIM's transitioning all of their devices to. And then there were some earnings restatements that happened, which kind of shook investor confidence a little bit further. Then you saw some BlackBerry sales slowdowns again in the summertime. So it's been a bit of a rough year for RIM from a public relations standpoint. And they are pinning a lot of their hopes on this new platform that they announced last week and the new BlackBerries, which we're expecting to see sometime next year.
So do you have a clear sense of what they plan to do to try to regain their once upon a time strength in the smartphone market?
I think a lot of it ties back to this BBX platform, which is a combination of the BlackBerry software and the QNX software that powers the Playbook. RIM said they're going to combine the two pieces of software to create one platform. And so what this will allow is it will encourage developers to come back to the table. So people don't really want to use a BlackBerry or an iPhone or an Android device. What they want is they want the things that these devices allow them to do. They want to play games, watch movies, text their friends, those kinds of things. And so the developer ecosystem, these third-party developers that exist outside of these companies, they build most of these applications. And RIM needs to bring those developers back to the table. What was the
when you say back to the table, do you mean in-house?
No. RIM's devices were seen as a bit difficult to code for because there were so many of them. There's only really one iPhone, right? And so there's one platform that you can kind of build for. When it came to the BlackBerry, they had different battery lives, different screen sizes, some had keyboards, some didn't. And so it was a bit difficult on developers. Now, with this one platform, RIM is saying that you will be able to build something and it'll work across BlackBerries and Playbooks. And that's going to be a big thing for developers because that's going to cut down on their costs and make BlackBerry a more attractive platform.
Can you talk to us a little bit here about the very unusual management structure they have insofar as this is a massive company with two CEOs, which is unusual, Jim Bosley, Mike Lazaridis. Does this management structure, from what you're hearing out there, still work?
They're also co-chairman of the board.
And co-chairs, right?
There have definitely been some complaints about the way the company is structured. There are some shareholders that believe that perhaps the board needs to take on a more activist role, that perhaps the CEO roles should be sectioned off from the chairman roles. RIM was on the verge of facing sort of a shareholder vote on this at the annual general meeting earlier this year. They managed to work out a deal, and I believe that there's a study that's being conducted about the management structure for now. But Jim Bosley and Mike Lazaridis are the ones that created this company. They built it from the ground up.
It's their baby,
no doubt about it. Absolutely, and they own more than 10% of the company between the two of them. So it remains to be seen how this happens, but I think if the BBX platform doesn't come out on time or if there's seen to be some stumbles in the next year, then that debate about whether or not the co-CEO role should be split and the co-chairman role should be split, I think you'll see that debate resurface.
Okay, get comfy. This question is going to take a bit of setup here.
Okay.
Apple was, I don't want to necessarily say it was a dying computer company, but it was in a lot of trouble until it kind of revolutionized the way we listen to music through iTunes. Then they launched their iPhone, and they revolutionized how people enjoy content on the internet with all of these new apps and so on and so forth. And then it created the iPad, and it changed the way that people think about computer portability and beautiful pictures online and all of that kind of thing. Can RIM survive without innovating and come up with new ways to do things that people want in the same way that Apple did?
I don't think any company in the technology space can continue without innovation. I think it depends on what that innovation looks like. What you're seeing with RIM is they really are walking two different strategies here. They have to make sure that they keep their enterprise customers very happy, that they keep the security and the encryption up as high as they possibly can, while at the same time trying to expand beyond that base to sort of Main Street consumers. And whether or not those two strategies, they can continue to improve on both of them remains to be seen. But what you saw last week was they've actually created an app store just for their enterprise customers. So you're going to see CIOs that are going to be able to authorize certain applications that they'll be able to download for the playbook. And there's all kinds of organization-specific applications that they're creating. So I think that, on the one hand, will keep them happy. On the other hand, if the new Blackberries can be good, buzz is a funny thing in the technology world. Sometimes
buzz is everything.
Buzz is everything. And I mean, remember how cool the Motorola Razr was, and then Motorola went away for the longest time. Now they're come back a little bit with Android, and Motorola is a whole different company. I think if RIM can come out with a killer device that really shows people, that this is an innovative company and that they can get people excited about it, I think you might hear some of this come back.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, once upon a time, when Barack Obama first, I mentioned this off the top of our interview, he was heartsick about how he was going to communicate with people he wanted to, because they were going to take his BlackBerry away because it wasn't secure enough for POTUS. So how does RIM get to be what it once was, which was the status symbol of somebody who was busy, cool, engaged, involved, and all of that kind of stuff?
It's a very good question. I think a lot of it has to come down to the joy of using the device. Apple always likes to talk about how their products are magic and revolutionary. Those are their two big words. And as much as we like to make fun of that, there's certainly an element of truth to that. People like to be wowed by their technology. You want to pick it up, you want it to work, and you want to be able to do everything with it. And when you look over at somebody else, and maybe their phone's a little bit faster, or they have different applications that aren't available on your platform, you get gadget envy. And I think if RIM can really reach out to the developer community, get some of those innovative applications onto its devices, and at the same time create devices that really pop in your hand, that you don't have to wait for software updates for little bugs to be fixed, I think you'll see that. But again, buzz is a tough thing to recapture, and right now everybody's talking Android, everybody wants the iPhone 4S. I was in an Apple store the other night, and it took me almost 25 minutes just to get someone to talk to me. So I mean, RIM is going up against two of the biggest technology companies in the world. I mean, how would you like your two biggest competitors to be, Apple and Google?
No, there's no question that's a tough neighborhood to be in. But I can't recall ever seeing a situation like Apple has, where people are lining up at midnight the night before waiting for the store to open so they can get their new hot product. I mean, they just don't do that for RIM, do they?
No,
and that's a problem.
And a lot of that comes down to marketing. I think that's probably one area, and you and I were talking off-air beforehand about the anonymous letter that came out supposedly from an unnamed RIM executive last summer. And one of the things that they criticized was RIM's marketing strategy, and sometimes that can be a bit muddled. And I think that's one thing where RIM can really concentrate on, is if that marketing can come out and they can convince people. If you watch an Apple ad, a lot of the time they're not really showing you the product so much as what you can do with it. And I think that's one of the things that RIM you're gonna see from them.
Well, part of what they're doing, Apple, I guess, they're selling cool. I mean, everybody wants to be cool, right?
Absolutely.
BlackBerry doesn't sell cool so much anymore, do they?
No, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that there aren't ways to do that. There are still blogs out there that show celebrity BlackBerry sightings. And you'd be amazed that a lot of the celebrities in Hollywood and professional athletes, most of them still carry a BlackBerry. So maybe that's one way to go about it, is to show exactly, you can be cool by association.
Are they too far behind in the app wars right now?
I don't think they're too far behind. They are behind. But I think that with this new platform, I think if they can encourage people to come back to the table, and one of the things that RIM was talking about last week was that it's the second most profitable platform to be on for a developer. And that's one thing that I think developers, will take a liking to.
People do look, though, at those other competitors and say they've got cultural relevancy. Do they still say that about BlackBerry?
When you talk to some developers have really made their living based on BlackBerry, but there are other ones out there who have said that when clients come to them and say, we make sandwiches and we need a sandwich app, we want to be on Apple first and we want an Android app as well, and then if you have time, build a BlackBerry app. But if that's seen as a third tier, you've also got Microsoft has their own platform, Windows Phone 7, that's coming out. So RIM has to make sure that they're still in that discussion so that when someone comes to the table and says, we want an Apple app and we want an Android app, we also want a BlackBerry app. I mean, if you're in that group, you're going to be okay.
Right on. Matt, good of you to join us tonight at TVO. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Always a pleasure.